"Fix this engine, and I'll marry you." Those 5 words slipped from Claire Montgomery's lips, part challenge, part cruel joke. A weapon, honed by privilege, meant to crush anyone she deemed beneath her. The entire Crescent Automotive Solutions workshop froze. 3 senior mechanics, who had just failed to revive a $3 million Aston Martin Valkyrie AMR Pro, stood motionless, afraid to even breathe. Mike, the shop owner, face flushed red, didn't know whether to laugh nervously or apologize to the client. And the man at whom that challenge was aimed, Nate Rhodes, a new mechanic who hadn't even finished his first shift, just stood there, hands still smeared with grease, staring at the woman in a $2,000 Armani suit. His eyes weren't angry, nor ashamed, just quietly observant, as if he were studying a complex machine, trying to find which part had slipped out of place to make such a cold, metallic sound. Then he smiled, a small, faintly sorrowful smile. He turned his back, went back to the car, and said nothing. Claire Montgomery walked out of the workshop to the awkward laughter of onlookers, leaving behind the mingled scent of Chanel No. 5, engine oil, and metal. Her Louboutins clicked sharply against the concrete, her posture straight, chin lifted high, completely unaware that in that moment she had just uttered a promise that would change her life forever. Because after that day, she would lose her $1 million empire, trade away her reputation, her career, everything she once believed was power, just to keep a promise she had thought was a joke. She didn't know then that the man with grease-stained hands and a quietly gentle smile would teach her the greatest lesson of her life, that some things broken can't be fixed with money, that some shattered hearts can only be mended by love, and that sometimes the most offhand words become the truest promises of all. If you too believe that there are engines in life that need more than money to repair, subscribe to this channel and join me on this journey, because the story of Claire and Nate has only just begun. The silver Aston Martin Valkyrie AMR Pro rolled into the Crescent Automotive Solutions workshop with all the grandeur of $3 million on 4 wheels. Claire Montgomery stepped out of the car. Her fitted Armani suit framed a tall, immaculate figure, so precise it almost felt cold, utterly at odds with the oil-stained walls and the metallic groan of tools echoing around her. 3 of the shop's top mechanics stood huddled around the V12 hybrid engine, faces tense, heads shaking in defeat. None dared touch the ECU without direct support from Aston Martin. This car wasn't just expensive, it was so complex that a single misstep could turn it into $3 million worth of scrap metal. "Sorry, Ms. Montgomery," said Mike, the shop owner, wiping his hands on an oil-streaked rag. "We've tried everything. You'll probably have to contact Aston Martin UK and have one of their specialists flown in." Claire frowned. She hated incompetence. She hated depending on anyone. And above all, she hated waiting. "How long?" she asked flatly. "Could be 2 weeks, maybe longer." 2 weeks without her car meant 2 weeks relying on a driver. 2 weeks of dependency. 2 weeks stripped of control. The one thing Claire valued more than money, ever since her bitter divorce. Just then, a man in a coverall stepped out from the repair bay. Tall, quiet, with slightly tousled brown hair and hands still stained with grease. Hands that bore the mark of honest, careful work. Mike gestured toward him. This is Nate Rhodes. Started this morning. Used to be an aerospace engineer at Boeing, but, well, he left to take care of his kid." Claire's eyes flicked over him from head to toe. An aerospace engineer turned mechanic? To her, that could only mean one of 2 things. A lack of skill or a lack of ambition? A smirk curled on her lips. Claire Montgomery had never been good at hiding her contempt, especially from people she considered beneath her social standing. And then the words came out, half joke, half mockery, so arrogant it froze the air around them. "Fix this engine, and I'll marry you." "You dare?" A beat of silence. Then came the laughter. Not loud, not genuine, just the uneasy, nervous chuckles of those caught between discomfort and disbelief, unsure whether to defend the millionaire client or stay out of her cruelty. Nate said nothing. He simply smiled, a faint, unbothered smile. There was no offense in his eyes, no hint of being challenged, only the quiet expression of a man who had seen enough of life to know which words were worth responding to, and which weren't. Claire turned on her heel. The click of her Louboutins echoed sharply against the concrete floor. The scent of Chanel No. 5 mingled with oil and metal, blending into the awkward laughter behind her. She didn't look back, and she certainly never imagined she'd see that silent man again. She was wrong. Completely wrong. To understand why Claire Montgomery became the cold, untouchable woman she is today, we have to go back 8 years. Back then, Claire believed in love the way children believe in magic, with a heart that knew no caution. She was 28 when she married Brandon Calloway, heir to one of the wealthiest real estate dynasties in Seattle. Claire truly believed their love would outlast any contract she had ever signed. For the first 3 years of marriage, she built her life around shared dreams, expanding her family's freight company while nurturing hopes of a peaceful home by Lake Washington. She worked 16 hours a day, driven by the need to prove she deserved the Calloway name. And in doing so, she missed countless dinners, weekends, and small, ordinary moments of marriage. Each time she told herself, "When I succeed, we'll finally have time for each other." But someday never came. Betrayal did. On a Tuesday night in March, Claire came home early from a business trip, carrying Brandon's favorite bottle of wine and plans for a long-delayed vacation. Instead of a welcoming smile, she opened the bedroom door and found Brandon there, with Jessica Chambers, her trusted assistant, the woman who had known her schedules, her secrets, and even her professional fears. That image burned itself into her memory like a photograph that would never fade. Brandon's frozen, guilty face, Jessica scrambling for her clothes, and the bedsheet Claire had chosen during their honeymoon in Italy. The divorce that followed was a brutal public war. Brandon's lawyer painted Claire as a work-obsessed woman, cold, unfeeling, incapable of love. The tabloids devoured the story, dubbing her the Ice Queen of the CEO world. That nickname followed her everywhere, into glass-walled boardrooms, into charity galas, drenched in champagne and camera flashes. When it was all over, Claire buried herself in work as a form of escape. She poured everything she had into Montgomery Global Freight, expanding it with the ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose. 3 consecutive acquisitions, an international logistics network, and an ironclad reputation. No one could deny her brilliance. But that success came at a cost. She stopped dating. She built walls around herself so high that no one could ever reach her. People called her a visionary, but impossible to work for. Employees whispered that she could make a room feel colder with just one glance. No one had seen her truly smile in years. And she treated every man who pursued her as though he were proposing a hostile takeover. "Love is a luxury I can no longer afford," she once told the only friend she had left. "It makes people weak. And weakness is something I will never allow myself to have again." Meanwhile, Nate Rhodes's story unfolded in the shadows of airplane hangars and hospital corridors. He had once been one of the most promising aerospace engineers in his division at Boeing, the kind of rare mind that could spot a flaw in a complex system even before anyone else sensed a problem. Colleagues admired his gift for seeing hidden patterns within chaos, for understanding how thousands of mechanical components worked together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Nate married his college sweetheart, Hannah, a pediatric nurse with gentle hands and an endless well of patience. They had planned their life with the precision of an engineering blueprint: career growth, a house in the suburbs, and children raised in safety, love, and abundance. But Hannah died 3 months after giving birth to their daughter, Stella. Her body couldn't overcome complications that doctors said occurred in fewer than 1% of all deliveries. Nate held his newborn daughter in the hospital room where his wife had just taken her last breath, feeling as though his entire world had collapsed, folding in on itself into a single crushing point of grief and responsibility. The technical puzzles that once thrilled him suddenly meant nothing compared to the only question that now mattered: how to keep this tiny life alive and well. He took a leave of absence. Then he resigned. He gave up a brilliant career in exchange for any job that would let him stay close to his child. From aerospace engineer, he became a freelance mechanic, working in small garages where he could set his own hours, where bosses understood if he had to rush Stella to the doctor, where no one questioned why he sometimes fell asleep with his daughter in his arms during lunch breaks. Because Stella was not a typical child. She was diagnosed with congenital cardiomyopathy when she was only 2 months old. Her tiny heart didn't pump blood as efficiently as it should. That meant daily medication, constant checkups, and a life limited by early fatigue and the ever-present fear of what might come next. One day, the doctor had said, she may need surgery, maybe even a heart transplant if the medication stops working. But for now, we take it one day at a time. Nate learned to check his daughter's heartbeat as naturally as checking the time. He learned to recognize the signs of exhaustion before Stella herself could feel them. He learned to balance work, fatherhood, and a quiet, gnawing fear. The fear that someday he wouldn't be good enough, fast enough, alert enough, and that he would lose his daughter, just as he'd lost his wife. "Daddy, you're really good at fixing things," little Stella would often say, her voice full of innocent faith. "You can fix anything that's broken." But Nate knew the truth. Some things that break can never be fixed. Some losses are never replaced. And all the skills, theories, and tools in the world couldn't mend a small, failing heart that grew weaker with every passing day. That night, after the shop had emptied out and the last echoes of laughter had faded, Nate Rhodes stayed behind, alone, with the Valkyrie. Claire Montgomery's mocking tone still replayed in his mind, along with the look of disdain she had given him, just another blue-collar worker, beneath her notice. But Nate had seen something else too, a $3 million machine no one could fix, and a woman for whom that machine had become a perfect metaphor for her own isolation. He approached the engine, not out of wounded pride, but with the quiet curiosity of a true craftsman. The Aston Martin Valkyrie's hybrid system was a masterpiece of engineering complexity, an intricate fusion of a V12 combustion engine and an electric motor connected by a sophisticated energy recovery network. Most mechanics would have been overwhelmed by the swarm of sensors, actuators, and control modules communicating in a chaotic mechanical symphony. But not Nate. He saw it differently. To him, every system, no matter how complex, was ultimately just a collection of individual parts that needed to understand and communicate with each other. The problem, he knew, usually wasn't in the components themselves, but in the connections between them. He traced every wire and power line with the patience of someone who had once designed aircraft navigation systems. Every voltage reading, every faint signal. He checked them all with tools simple, almost primitive compared to the advanced aerospace equipment he used to handle. The dashboard showed that all readings were normal, yet the engine control unit kept throwing out nonsensical error codes, codes that shouldn't even coexist within the same system. For more than 2 hours, Nate combed through every junction, every ground wire, every data link between the engine and its electronic brain. And when he finally found the cause, he almost smiled. The fault was small, elegantly small. A voltage converter buried deep inside the hybrid structure had been grounded incorrectly. The misalignment was too minor to trigger a safety alert, but it created just enough electrical interference to make the system misread its own signals and shut the drivetrain down. It was the kind of mistake anyone could make, but only someone with discipline and patience could find. And Nate was exactly that kind of man. He made the correction with care, double-checked every step, ensuring his fix didn't cause new errors elsewhere. Then he cleared the codes, reset the sequence, and listened as the machine came to life again, its deep, steady growl settling into a flawless rhythm. The Valkyrie purred more smoothly than it had when it left the factory. But Nate didn't wake anyone to share the victory. He simply cleaned his tools, washed the grease from his hands, and left the shop. Outside, the city lay silent. He drove home, peeked into his daughter's room, and watched Stella sleeping soundly, her small chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. To Nate, this wasn't a challenge to conquer, not a chance to prove himself to some arrogant woman. It was simply a problem that needed fixing, a job to be done right. Because that was how he lived his life, doing the work he knew how to do, without recognition, without applause, content with the quiet peace that came from knowing he had done his job perfectly. The next morning, Claire Montgomery returned to the workshop, already bracing herself for another long day of frustration, and the usual excuses about complex systems or missing replacement parts. But when she pressed the start button, the Aston Martin roared to life instantly. The dashboard lit up, displaying flawless performance metrics across every system. The engine's growl was smooth, steady, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Claire stared at the numbers, then looked around the workshop. For a moment, her perfectly composed face betrayed a flicker of genuine surprise. "Who fixed it?" she asked, her tone carrying a curiosity she hadn't felt the day before. Mike, the shop owner, froze. He hesitated, halfway raising a hand toward Nate, but Nate caught the glance and gave a subtle shake of his head. He just kept washing his hands, slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if nothing remarkable had happened. But Claire Montgomery hadn't become the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation by missing details. She saw the way Mike's eyes darted toward Nate, saw the silent exchange between them, just long enough to reveal who had really brought her car back to life. And she understood. For the first time in years, Claire felt something unfamiliar stir inside her. Not guilt, not admiration, but a quiet disruption. Standing there amid the scent of oil and the slanted morning light streaming through the garage door, she watched the man she had mocked the day before quietly pack up his tools. Something shifted in her chest. Not quite regret, not quite respect. Just a flicker of realization. Maybe, just maybe, she had misjudged this man. 2 weeks later, Claire Montgomery found herself back at Crescent Automotive Solutions during lunch hour. For a reason even she knew was flimsy. Just checking on a minor electrical issue. one that probably didn't exist at all. She spotted Nate Rhodes in a quiet corner of the workshop, where afternoon light filtered through dusty windows. Beside him, a little girl, no more than 7, was curled up asleep, her head resting gently on his thigh. The child looked smaller than her age, with delicate features and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent in the soft light. Fragile, as if a careless touch could make her shatter. "My daughter, Stella," Nate said softly, careful not to wake her. "School ended early today, and the babysitter had an emergency." Stella stirred at the sound of her father's voice and opened her eyes, striking, crystal blue eyes that stood out vividly against her fair, almost translucent complexion. She looked at Claire with open curiosity, not a trace of fear or judgment, studying the elegant woman in the tailored suit and perfectly arranged hair with more wonder than awe. "I dreamed about you," Stella said, her voice clear but sure. "You were a princess, but you were sad, because your castle was empty." Something trembled inside Claire's chest, a feeling she thought had been buried long ago. She knelt down, lowering herself to the child's eye level, and studied that small, fragile face, a vague ache rising within her. There was something about Stella that felt familiar, something beyond the physical frailty, something that brushed against a long-buried memory of Michael, the younger brother she had lost to a congenital heart defect when she was 22. "She has a heart condition," Nate said gently, as if answering the unspoken question that had just crossed Claire's mind. "Congenital cardiomyopathy. The medication helps, and we have to do regular checkups. But it means she gets tired easily." Claire watched as Nate placed 2 fingers on his daughter's wrist, checking her pulse with the natural precision of a father who had learned to read the vital signs of life as easily as checking the time. The tenderness in that simple, careful gesture made Claire's throat tighten. How long had it been since she'd seen love expressed so purely? Without agenda, without pride, without armor? For years, Claire had believed that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. But watching this quiet man care for his fragile daughter, she felt something shift inside her, as though a door she had sealed shut was slowly, silently opening, and something warm had begun to wake within. "The doctors say, one day she may need surgery," Nate went on, his tone calm but his eyes shadowed with worry. "A transplant, if the medication stops working. But for now, we take it one day at a time." "Daddy's really good at fixing things," Stella said, turning to Claire, her voice soft but certain. "He knows how to fix everything that's broken." Claire smiled, so faintly she barely noticed it herself. For the rest of that lunch hour, she stayed and talked with Stella about school, her favorite books, the drawings she made of an imaginary world where everyone was healthy and happy. And when it was finally time to leave, Claire realized she didn't want to. She didn't want to go back to the cold glass office where walls reflected the image of the powerful woman she was expected to be. She didn't want to drown again in endless meetings, strategic plans, and performance charts, things that once felt vital, but now seemed strangely hollow. She looked down at the Cartier watch on her wrist, the gift she had bought herself when her company hit its first billion-dollar revenue milestone, and she realized how cold it felt. Colder, by far, than the tiny hand of Stella Rhodes that had just waved goodbye. In the weeks that followed, Claire Montgomery began to form a new habit, one she didn't quite dare to name. During her lunch breaks, she would drive to Crescent Automotive Solutions, always armed with a plausible excuse, checking the electrical system, or asking a few more questions about the hybrid engine. They were perfect reasons, reasonable enough to raise no suspicion, vague enough to hide the truth of why she kept coming back. She started bringing coffee for Nate, cookies for Stella, and always said it with a casual shrug. I bought too much. Didn't want it to go to waste. Those little lies, Claire realized, were like a thin layer of fabric shielding her heart, protecting it from the question she didn't dare to ask herself. Why did she feel drawn to this quiet corner of the world where everything suddenly felt easier to breathe? One afternoon, Claire brought a box of macarons from the most expensive French bakery in Seattle. When she opened the box, Stella's eyes widened, gazing at the neatly arranged pastel-colored treats as if they were treasure. "You bought these for me?" the girl whispered, her tiny finger hovering over a soft pink one. I thought you might like them," Claire said, her voice so gentle it startled even herself. Stella picked a lavender macaron, took a small bite, and her face lit up with pure delight. "I've never eaten anything this good," she exclaimed. That smile, so innocent, so real, seemed to brighten the entire workshop. Nate glanced at them from his workbench. There was something in his eyes Claire couldn't quite read. Not suspicion, not caution, just awareness. As if he were truly seeing her. Not the composed woman in the Armani suit, but someone else underneath. "Too much sugar isn't good for her," he said gently, his voice calm but warm. "Her heart—" "I know," Claire interrupted quickly, surprised at how her own voice sounded. Almost like an apology. "I didn't think about that. I'm sorry. It's okay." And for the first time she saw Nate Rhodes truly smile. A quiet, warm smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "One cookie now, and then won't hurt," he said. "She just shouldn't eat the whole box." Stella giggled, then pushed the box toward Claire. "Then you keep the rest. So next time you come back, we can share them." Claire laughed, softly, naturally, without her usual guard. She took the box, feeling as though she had just accepted an invitation she couldn't refuse. And she did come back. Day after day. Each time with a perfectly reasonable excuse. And one unspoken reason she would never admit. In the weeks that followed, the conversations between Claire and Nate began to stretch longer, flow easier. At first, they were strictly technical, about hybrid engines, fuel efficiency, and the kind of mechanical details only true enthusiasts could discuss for hours without boredom. But somewhere along the way, those talks began to drift, quietly, almost imperceptibly, into something deeper. Into conversations about resilience, about loss, about how people learn to stand again when life has already burned them to the ground. One rainy afternoon, that kind of soft, lingering rain Seattle was famous for, they sat side by side on the old wooden bench outside the shop while Stella napped inside the office. The rhythmic patter of rain on the tin roof filled the silence between them, creating a calm, steady heartbeat in the air. "Do you ever miss your old job?" Claire asked, handing him half of the sandwich she'd brought from her favorite downtown delicatessen. Nate was quiet for a long while, as though he were listening to the rain for an answer. "Sometimes," he said finally, "I miss the feeling of solving a problem no one else could. That intellectual puzzle, that moment when all the pieces finally fit together." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the window, where Stella was curled up on an old sofa, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. "But then I realized there are other kinds of problems worth solving. Keeping Stella healthy, making her happy. To me, that's more important than any flight guidance system I might never see take off." Something caught in Claire's chest, a soft, sharp ache she hadn't felt in years. She had spent her entire life chasing the big things: million-dollar deals, headlines, admiration, power. But sitting here, in the quiet rhythm of the rain, beside a man who had given up everything to hold on to the one thing he loved most, she wondered if she had been measuring success all wrong. "I never wanted kids," Claire murmured, her voice barely above the sound of rain. "After my divorce, I told myself that was lucky, that children only complicate things. But now you see Stella and you wonder," Nate said gently, not as a question, not as judgment, but as understanding. Claire nodded, her voice trembling. "Now I see Stella, and I realize what I've missed." And for the first time in years, Claire let herself cry. Not discreetly, not with control, but quietly, like something long held was finally dissolving in the damp Seattle air. Nate didn't move. He didn't reach out, didn't try to comfort her with words or platitudes. He simply sat beside her, steady, silent. A presence strong enough to let her grief exist safely. And somehow, that was enough. From that day on, Claire began to share more. She told him about the pressure of running the family company, the endless meetings, the suffocating loneliness that came with success, about how her failed marriage had taught her to trust numbers and contracts instead of feelings and promises. Nate listened, really listened, without judgment, without interruption, only occasionally asking the kind of questions that made her look deeper into herself. "You talk about your work like it's a fortress," he said one afternoon, "something you built to protect yourself from the world." Claire gave a wry smile. "Maybe it is. Maybe that's exactly what I needed." Nate was quiet for a moment, then spoke, his voice low and steady like the sound of rain at night. "Or maybe that fortress has become a prison, and you're the only one who can unlock the door." Those words lingered with Claire for days afterward. Not as something clever, but as an echo, small and persistent, reverberating in a place inside her she had long believed was made of stone. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Thursday afternoon at the end of October, when Seattle was once again wrapped in its familiar, lingering rain, the kind that didn't pour, but stayed just long enough to make people think more than usual. Claire stepped into the workshop, greeted by the warm, metallic scent of oil and steel. There was Nate Rhodes, bent over his workbench, examining a spark plug through a magnifying lens, turning it slowly under the dim golden light. The charred edges on the electrode told him a story. The story of an engine struggling to run the way it should. Claire stood there for a few minutes, silently watching him work. There was something in the way he moved. The patience, the focus, the quiet grace of someone used to living among small details that most people overlook, yet that truly make all the difference. "You approach every problem like it's a puzzle waiting to be solved," she said, her voice carrying equal parts curiosity and admiration. "Even the tiniest things get your full attention." Nate looked up, meeting her gaze through the dusty amber light. "I learned a long time ago," he said slowly, "that small things can cause big failures. In aerospace engineering, a minor manufacturing flaw can bring down an entire plane. In relationships, a tiny misunderstanding left unresolved can destroy years of trust. And, with Stella," his tone softened, "a missed dose of medicine, or a small symptom ignored, can mean the difference between life and death. So yes, I pay attention to the details." Claire said nothing. The words seeped into her, one by one, like raindrops soaking through the thick fabric of her coat. She thought of the years she'd lived, the mergers, the board meetings, the endless late nights under fluorescent lights. She had devoted all her energy to the big picture, to multi-million-dollar strategies, to growth curves and profit margins. And in doing so, she had ignored the small signals, the glances, the silences, the words left unsaid, the very things that might have saved her marriage, or at least the part of herself that still knew how to feel. She had believed that bigger was always better, that control meant safety, that emotional distance was a mark of professionalism and strength. But standing here, in the soft, dust-filled light of the workshop, those beliefs suddenly felt fragile. "What if you're wrong?" Claire asked quietly. "What if paying too much attention to every little thing just means living in constant fear that everything might fall apart?" Nate smiled, one of those rare, unguarded smiles that made his usually calm face come alive. "Then at least," he said, "when it all does fall apart, I'll know I did everything I could to stop it. And sometimes, if you really pay attention, you can fix the small things before they turn into disasters." Silence settled between them after that. The soft tapping of rain on the metal roof, the fading light filtering through dusty windows, and two people, both of whom had spent years hiding behind discipline and logic, stood there quietly. Two people who had built walls around their hearts. Now, slowly, we're learning how to open the first small doors. The storm began with a single photograph. Marcus Chen, an automotive blogger who made his living capturing candid moments of luxury car enthusiasts, happened to be at Crescent Automotive Solutions that day to shoot a rare Porsche 911 GT3 RS. But instead of the car, he saw something else, and instantly knew he had stumbled upon media gold. Claire Montgomery, one of the most celebrated CEOs in the logistics industry, was sitting on an old workbench in the garage, sharing a modest lunch with a man in a grease-stained coverall. Beside them, a little girl played with toy cars, laughing freely. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the workshop window, casting a soft, golden warmth over the three of them. A moment so unexpectedly tender, so disarmingly human, that Marcus didn't hesitate. He lifted his camera and clicked. The caption he chose turned an innocent moment into a media explosion. "The Ice Queen melts for a blue-collar Romeo. CEO Claire Montgomery's secret love at a repair shop." Within 24 hours, the photo went viral. Thousands of shares, hundreds of reposts. Financial publications dove into Claire's private life with the same ferocity as entertainment tabloids. The contrast between her public image, the steel CEO, and the gentle sunlit scene in the photo was irresistible. Then the flames spread. An anonymous former employee of Montgomery Global Freight leaked details of Claire's brutal divorce and her years of loneliness that followed. Overnight, every media outlet wanted to unmask the woman behind the ice. The untouchable executive suddenly made human by a rumor of love. Paparazzi began camping outside Crescent Automotive, hoping to catch another glimpse of the cold CEO and her mystery mechanic. Meanwhile, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. Douglas Sterling, the 70-year-old chairman, a staunch traditionalist who had doubted Claire's leadership from the start, was the first to speak in the damage control session. "This kind of publicity is harming our corporate image," Sterling declared, his voice booming across the glass-walled boardroom. "Our clients and investors expect a certain level of professionalism. A CEO romantically involved with a mechanic. It shows poor judgment, even recklessness." Claire sat still, hands interlocked beneath the table. She felt the familiar chill of betrayal, the same cold that had pierced her during her divorce. The very people who had profited from her success were now dissecting her personal life as if it were a failed merger requiring board approval. "My private life has nothing to do with my ability to run this company," she said calmly, her voice sharp as glass, though inside, rage and hurt churned like a storm. "It does," another member cut in. "The stock dropped 2% since the photo went public." 2%. A trivial fluctuation in any ordinary market cycle. But to them, it was the perfect excuse. Pressure mounted fast. Major clients demanded assurances that her personal life would not affect her leadership. Whispers spread in conference halls, eyes followed her at industry events. Everywhere she went, she could feel her image being redrawn. Not as the commanding CEO, but as a woman who had lost focus, who had let emotion cloud judgment. And so, Claire realized she was facing an impossible choice: to protect her right to personal happiness, or to protect the empire she had built with her own blood, her tears, and her solitude. It was a choice between two versions of herself: the steel executive who had sacrificed everything for success, and the woman who had just begun to learn how to love again, honestly, openly, without armor. That night, before the scheduled press conference, Claire sat alone in her corner office at Pioneer Square, staring out at the Seattle port. Stacks of metal containers glowed under the floodlights, their reflections rippling across the dark water. Each one a symbol of the empire she had built from ambition, discipline, and loneliness. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Nate. "Stella asked about you. She drew you a picture. A princess finding her way home." Claire stared at the screen. The words blurred through her tears, and for the first time in a very long while, she wasn't sure she still belonged to the cold world behind the glass. The press conference was scheduled for Friday morning, inside the gleaming steel and glass headquarters of Montgomery Global Freight. Claire Montgomery stood behind the podium, dressed in her most commanding power suit. Stiff collar, hair tied neatly in a bun, every detail calculated to perfection, as if she were preparing to negotiate a billion-dollar merger instead of speaking about her own heart. In front of her, cameras and microphones piled up like a metallic forest. The flashes burst like cold lightning, a storm of light and silence. The journalists in the room waited, eager for spectacle, a romantic confession, or a dramatic denial, something to keep their headlines alive for another few days. But Claire gave them neither. What she delivered instead was a masterclass in corporate crisis management. "The recent media attention surrounding my personal life," she began, her voice steady, her expression unshakable, "is based entirely on speculation and misunderstanding." She paused, scanning the room, each word chosen and dropped with the precision of a blade. "I have no romantic involvement with any employee of Crescent Automotive Solutions. The photos in question capture a routine discussion about vehicle maintenance. Nothing more, nothing less. I encourage the media to focus on Montgomery Global Freight's record-breaking quarterly performance, rather than inventing fictional stories about my private affairs." She finished, lips pressed together, her poise flawless. Voice calm, expression controlled, every line exactly what the world expected from a legendary CEO. And for that very reason, it was a perfect lie. At the workshop, Nate Rhodes watched the broadcast on an old TV in the small, cluttered office of Crescent Automotive. Stella had fallen asleep in his arms, her breathing soft and shallow after a long day at school. The bluish light from the screen washed over Claire's face. The woman he once believed had finally learned to smile for real. But now, he saw the mask slide back into place. Cold. Precise. Untouchable. He didn't feel anger, nor resentment. Only a deep, quiet sadness for the woman on that screen. The woman who had dared, for a fleeting moment, to open her heart, only to lock it again. As if happiness were a sin she could not afford. She was afraid, and her fear had driven her to choose safety over joy. The next morning, as the rain over Seattle finally stopped, Nate arrived at the workshop early. He folded his tools carefully, wiping each wrench, each screwdriver, with the deliberate tenderness of someone saying goodbye. No one asked questions, and he offered no explanations. He simply left his resignation letter on Mike's desk. Short, direct, without excuses. He kissed Stella's forehead before dropping her off at school, promising to make her favorite soup that evening, and watched her run toward the classroom doors. Then, without a word, he walked away from Crescent Automotive Solutions, quietly, just as he had once walked into Claire Montgomery's life. No forwarding address, no message, no dramatic farewell for the world to speculate about. He simply left. 3 days later, Claire Montgomery returned to the workshop. She expected to see Nate in his usual place. At that cluttered workbench, sleeves rolled up, hands streaked with oil, eyes calm and steady behind the quiet focus of a man who never rushed. But the space was empty. The toolbox was gone. Only the faint scent of motor oil lingered, a trace of an honest presence that had once filled the room. Grounded, patient, and now gone. Mike, the shop owner, looked at her with a sigh. He was the best mechanic we ever had, even if he was only here a short while. "Did he say why he left?" Claire asked, trying to keep her voice composed, though the fracture beneath it was impossible to hide. Mike met her gaze for a long moment, long enough for understanding to pass between them. Then he asked softly, "Do I really need to say it, Ms. Montgomery?" The question slipped past her armor like a needle through steel. For the first time since her divorce, Claire felt truly alone. The company's stock had recovered. The media had moved on to their next target. The board congratulated her for flawless crisis management. She had protected her image, preserved her empire, and upheld her reputation as the unbreakable CEO. But all that was left were numbers. Empty, echoing, meaningless. No report could fill the silence where Stella's laughter used to be, or replace the quiet steadiness of Nate's presence. So Claire buried herself in work, as if productivity could drown out pain. She stayed late at the office, poring over quarterly reports and expansion plans. Documents that once thrilled her, but now read like pages from a language she no longer understood. She attended conferences, charity galas, endless board meetings where people praised her resilience. The compliments sounded hollow, like consolation prizes for a game she no longer wanted to win. At night, alone in her Elliott Bay penthouse, Claire sat motionless before her phone. Her finger hovered over a single contact, Nate Rhodes. But, as always, she never pressed call. What could she possibly say? "Sorry for denying you in front of the world? Sorry for choosing my empire over the only thing that made me feel alive?" Or perhaps the truth, that she was still the same woman, too afraid to risk everything, even when she knew exactly what truly mattered. 3 weeks after Nate's departure, Claire's phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, calm, professional, edged with worry. "Hello, Ms. Montgomery. This is Dr. Lauren Reed, pediatric cardiologist at Seattle Children's Hospital. I'm calling because you're listed as the emergency contact for a patient named Stella Rhodes." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She gripped the phone tighter. "Stella was just admitted for emergency surgery," the doctor continued. "Her condition deteriorated rapidly. We need to replace a heart valve immediately. But there are issues with insurance and payment clearance. Her father, Mr. Rhodes, is trying to handle everything alone, but frankly, he looks exhausted. Claire didn't hesitate. She drove straight to the hospital, not thinking of the press, the shareholders, or the carefully built image she had spent years maintaining. When she reached the cardiac ICU, she found Nate slumped in a plastic chair, his head buried in his hands. The sterile hospital light made him look pale, hollowed out, as if sleepless nights had stripped away everything but raw endurance. Scattered around his feet were sheets of technical sketches, crude drawings of a mechanical heart valve, pencil notes scribbled in the margins. And in that instant, Claire understood. This was how Nate coped with the uncontrollable, by trying to build something, anything, that might make sense of the chaos. When he finally looked up and saw her, there was no surprise in his eyes, only quiet gratitude, and a grief so deep it no longer had the strength to speak. Claire sat down beside him. No explanations, no apologies. Her presence, steady, silent, unwavering, was all she had to offer. It was her way of saying, "I'm here." They sat there side by side, in that fluorescent corridor where the lights never dimmed. Two people who had once built walls around their hearts, now reduced to a single fragile hope for a 7-year-old girl who had taught them both what unconditional love truly meant. "I should have stayed in aerospace," Nate murmured, his voice breaking, the words barely audible, half confession, half self-blame. The insurance would have been better. The pay higher. Maybe I could have gotten Stella preventive care earlier. Maybe none of this would have happened. His voice was raw, exhausted, trembling with fear. Claire reached for his hand, the rough, calloused hand of a man who'd built his life on hard work, now shaking with fatigue and despair. "You've given her something money could never buy," she said quietly, her tone steadier than the storm of emotion behind it. "You gave Stella a father who shows up, someone who notices when something's wrong before anyone else does, and who loves her enough to give up everything for her." Nate looked up at her, and for the first time, Claire saw a crack in that calm, steadfast composure that had always surrounded him. Tears slid down his worn face, the face of a man who had endured everything in silence. "I can't lose her," he whispered. "Stella's all I have left of Hannah. She's the only thing that makes this life make sense." Claire's grip on his hand tightened. "You won't lose her," she said, and in that moment a decision formed in her mind, sharp and certain. "I promise you." Over the next 6 hours, while Stella lay on the operating table, Claire acted. No hesitation, no press statements, no need for credit. She made calls to every medical contact she'd ever funded through her company's philanthropic programs. She arranged for the hospital's top pediatric cardiac surgeon to join the team mid-procedure. She authorized every cost, granting access to the newest experimental techniques regardless of insurance limits. And while she waited, she created something new. The Stella Rhodes Medical Trust, a fund to guarantee that the little girl would have lifelong care, that no bill, no policy, no bureaucracy would ever stand in the way of her survival. She didn't tell Nate. She didn't want his gratitude. She did it simply because it was right, because the child who had once told her that the princess's castle was empty had shown her what it meant to fill it again. When Dr. Lauren Reed emerged from the operating room, her mask hanging loose, relief softening her features, Nate nearly collapsed. "The surgery was a success," she said. "Stella's going to make a full recovery." Nate broke down. His whole body trembled with release. Claire wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in years, tears streamed down her face too. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. hope. Dr. Reed continued, her tone gentle now. She'll need lifelong follow-up, but the new valve is functioning beautifully. Her heart is pumping strong. She's got an excellent chance at a normal, healthy life. Then the doctor turned to Claire, and though she said nothing, her eyes spoke clearly. She knew. This miracle hadn't come from luck. It had come from the woman who'd sat outside that room for 6 hours, refusing to leave. That night, Stella slept peacefully in her hospital bed, surrounded by the steady hum of monitors and the soft rhythm of new life. On the screen, her heartbeat pulsed strong and even, a small, glowing testament that this heart had chosen to stay. Claire and Nate sat by the window, watching the city lights ripple across the dark Seattle sky. The world outside kept moving, but inside that quiet room, two people who had lost almost everything were learning how to begin again. They spoke softly, voices barely above the hum of the machines, as if afraid to disturb the fragile miracle they'd been given. They talked about second chances, about courage, about how to rebuild a life from the wreckage without losing themselves again. No one mentioned the media storm that had nearly destroyed them. No one spoke of shareholders, reputations, or control. There was only silence, warm, real, and alive, shared between two people who had fallen to the bottom and found each other in the least likely place, the white, sterile stillness of a hospital room. Claire looked toward the bed, where Stella slept peacefully, and said softly, "I'm not the woman who made that joke in your garage anymore. That woman was afraid of everything that truly mattered. I don't want to be afraid anymore." Nate turned toward her, eyes gentle, not judgmental, only understanding. "We're all afraid," he said quietly. "The question is, do we let the fear drive us? Or do we keep walking, even while we're afraid?" Claire said nothing, but in the silence that followed, something inside her broke open. Softly, honestly. She realized that for years she had built an empire, a brand, a legend, only to end up alone inside it. That success without connection was just an elegant form of loneliness, and that no amount of money in the world could ever buy the simple human warmth she had found here, sitting beside a hospital bed, next to a man who had taught her what love truly meant, and a child whose small, steadfast heart had reminded her how to feel again. 6 months after Stella's surgery, Claire Montgomery stunned the business world. She announced her resignation as CEO of Montgomery Global Freight, stepping down from the empire she had spent half her life building, to pursue something entirely new: vocational education and small business development. The decision cost her millions in stock options and executive privileges, but it gave her something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom to build a life rooted in her own values rather than in the expectations the world had placed upon her. "They think you've lost your mind," Nate said one evening, as Claire signed her final resignation papers. She smiled, the first real smile many had ever seen on her face. "Maybe I have," she said softly, "but I've been crazy in the wrong way for too many years. It's time to try a different kind of crazy." A few weeks later, Claire and Nate opened Evergreen Skills Academy, a hybrid between an auto repair shop and a technical training center, set inside a renovated warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle, not far from the newly revitalized Georgetown district. Their mission sounded simple, yet it was revolutionary: to provide high-quality technical education for those society had left behind. Former inmates, high school dropouts, single mothers, anyone who needed a second chance. Nate led the design of the hands-on training programs, while Claire managed operations, community partnerships, and funding. They recruited instructors not just for skill, but for patience, for heart. Within months, the shop gained a reputation, not only for honest workmanship and fair prices, but for being a place of dignity, kindness, and hope. Each graduating class left Evergreen with calloused hands and rekindled hearts, ready to start over, ready to rebuild their lives. Claire discovered that she loved teaching practical business principles to eager students far more than she had ever enjoyed impressing a boardroom with quarterly forecasts. She found joy in seeing former addicts rebuild their lives through honest labor, in watching teenage mothers regain financial independence, in knowing she was helping to carve out a path toward stability for those the world had once labeled as failures. Of course, the transformation wasn't easy. Claire had to start from scratch, learning how to work with her hands, how to diagnose an engine problem by sound and feel instead of reading it off a data chart. She had to learn how to listen, how to communicate with students whose lives were worlds apart from her own privileged past. The early days were hard. Her manicured nails cracked and turned black with grease. Her hands ached from lifting heavy tools, and her pride took a beating every time she made a mistake, and a student had to fix it for her. One afternoon, while replacing a complex suspension system, Claire's hand slipped. A sharp edge tore into her knuckle. Blood spilled fast. She walked to the washroom, staring at the red stream on her skin, almost disbelieving it was hers. Nate found her there, his expression a mix of concern and quiet amusement. "First time you've ever been hurt on the job, huh?" he asked, gently wrapping a bandage around her hand. Claire nodded. "I spent my whole career keeping my hands clean," she admitted, "in every possible sense of the word." "And now?" Nate asked. She smiled, looking at the white bandage. "Now I've learned. Some things are worth getting your hands dirty for." Every scratch, every mistake, every tired evening in that workshop taught Claire something new, about the strength of resilience, about the dignity of honest work, and about the quiet joy of watching others rediscover themselves. She had once built an empire out of contracts and capital. Now she was building a world anew, with grease-stained hands and a heart that finally knew how to love. Stella grew up radiant in the world they had built together. Her heart condition still required careful monitoring, but every day, Claire and Nate watched her grow stronger, more confident, as if simply witnessing the two most important adults in her life rebuild something meaningful from the wreckage had taught her how to stand up after any storm. She became the unofficial mascot of Evergreen Skills Academy, with quick wit and a warm smile that could light up the entire workshop. Everyone who came to Evergreen adored her. The trainees often said she was their reminder that love could repair far more than broken engines ever could. In the afternoons after school, Stella would sit at a small desk in the corner of the workshop, doing her homework amid the steady hum of engines and the laughter of students learning their craft. Sometimes she'd pull out her box of crayons and begin to draw. Pictures of families, of people helping one another, of hearts being fixed, both literally and figuratively. One afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the window and glimmered off the grease-stained hands of Claire, she knelt beside Stella's desk. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" she asked softly, as if afraid the question itself might shatter something delicate. Stella tilted her head, thoughtful, her small face suddenly serious in that pure, unfiltered way only children can be. "I think being happy doesn't mean you feel good all the time," she said slowly. "Being happy means someone still loves you, even when you don't feel good." Claire froze. A warmth swelled in her chest, rising until it overflowed as tears. From the mouth of an 8-year-old had come the kind of wisdom she herself had spent a lifetime chasing. Claire smiled, brushing a soft lock of hair from the girl's face. "You're a very smart girl, you know that?" Stella grinned, her bright blue eyes gleaming like a clear sky after rain. "Dad says I've got a wise heart," she replied playfully. "I think that's even better than just having a smart head." 1 year after Evergreen Skills Academy was born, Claire Montgomery decided it was time to say aloud what everyone had quietly known and patiently waited for. Because over that year, she and Nate Rhodes hadn't just built a successful business. They had rebuilt a life, from pieces once thought beyond repair. The 1-year anniversary celebration was held inside the old warehouse, now glowing with hundreds of warm golden bulbs strung above like stars. Long tables draped in white linen. Food prepared by their own students. The air filled with laughter, pride, gratitude, and that unmistakable energy shared only by those who understand what a second chance truly means. Claire stepped up to the small stage. In her hands was a small, carefully wrapped package she had carried for weeks, a secret that had waited for the right moment to be unveiled. When she opened it, the chatter faded into silence. Inside was a spark plug, the very one from her Aston Martin Valkyrie, now polished silver and mounted on a wooden base engraved, "Evergreen, Year 1." "A year ago," Claire began, her voice steady but threaded with emotion, "I made a joke to a man I barely knew. I told him that if he could fix my engine, I'd marry him." A soft ripple of laughter swept through the room. "I thought I was being clever, maybe a little cruel, definitely arrogant." She paused, glancing toward the front table where Nate sat with Stella beside him, both looking up at her with eyes full of love and pride. "What I didn't understand then," Claire continued, "was that he wasn't just fixing my car. He was fixing something deeper, a part of me that had been broken for so long I didn't even notice. He taught me that real strength isn't about control or about building walls around your heart. Real strength is showing up, every day, for the people you love, even when there's nothing glamorous about it." Claire stepped down from the stage, walked toward Nate, and held out the polished spark plug mounted on its base. An offering, a symbol, a vow. "So, this time," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I'm not joking. You fixed my engine, Nate Rhodes. You fixed my heart. You fixed the way I see the world, and my belief that two broken people can still build something beautiful together." Nate stood, his eyes shining with emotion. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a silver ring, inlaid with tiny gears and springs, handmade by Stella herself. It was simple, yet breathtaking. The kind of beauty crafted by someone who understands that what lasts must also work. "I love you, Claire Montgomery," Nate said, his deep voice carrying through the quiet room. "I love your mind, your drive, and your courage to rise from the wreckage. I love that you aren't afraid to get your hands dirty for others. I love that you see beauty in ordinary work, and that you've taught me we can dream again, without forgetting what loss has taught us." When Claire whispered, "Yes," the room erupted. Applause, cheers, laughter, and tears. Not just for a proposal, but for two souls who had dared to believe in life again. Surrounded by friends, students, and partners, people who had all found hope and a second chance at Evergreen, they embraced as the old warehouse glowed with pure, unguarded joy. It wasn't just an anniversary. It was a declaration that love can begin in the most unexpected places, that the best endings often come when someone is brave enough to fix what seemed beyond saving. The story of Claire Montgomery, Nate Rhodes, and Stella is a quiet but powerful reminder that true strength isn't in never being broken, but in allowing ourselves to be healed. That success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we're willing to share. And that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about learning to see the beauty in imperfection and choosing, every single day, to keep doing the small, patient work that keeps it running. Because in the end, we are all complicated machines, in need of care, maintenance, and sometimes total rebuilds. And if we're lucky, we find someone who isn't afraid of the grease, who doesn't flinch at the mess, and who's willing to pick up the tools and fix us, piece by piece. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you believe is worth fixing. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where we learn together how to mend the small cracks in our hearts.